Well, hey everyone, it's Chris with Keys to the Shop, and welcome to this new Founder Friday episode for the month of June. I'm really excited for this one. We are featuring Rahul Reddy, who is the founder of Subko Specialty Coffee Roasters in Mumbai, India. If you're not familiar with Keys to the Shop, this is a show that gives you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFurio, like I said, and I'm really excited to have you along for the journey today, for exploring the journey of our guest. And if you're not familiar with the Founder Friday series, all you need to do is go to keystotheshop.com. And when you go there, just search for Founder Friday, and all of the past episodes from the last 7 years, featuring some of the best founders and operators in the business, will be at your fingertips. And that's what's amazing about being able to talk with people and learn their stories, that you get to learn from their mistakes, their successes, the lessons that they've learned. And I'm just really excited about Founder Friday. So go ahead and go to keystotheshop.com. And also don't forget to subscribe to the show on your podcast player of choice and here on YouTube. I say here because you might be watching this on YouTube, because we've actually started to put these things out on YouTube. So it's a new thing for us a little bit, but better late than never, I guess. And so yeah, go ahead and subscribe on YouTube as well, and tell your friends, tell your family. Now, part of what I do is one-on-one coaching with clients who are either opening coffee shops for the first time, and many who are in a certain stage of their coffee shop where they want to grow, or they want to refine something or solve a specific problem, whether that's onboarding and training, or culture based, or scaling responsibly in a way that they can learn from past mistakes and then start this second iteration of their store on a better footing than they did before. I love helping clients move from where they are now to where they want to be. And it just takes a lot of good conversation, some really solid tools, and some coaching to get you there. And that's what Keys to the Shop Consulting is all about. So go ahead and email Chris at keystotheshop.com, and we can have a conversation and hear what's going on. It's a free discovery call, so no risk there. And I think this is the first step in the right direction if you feel like Keys to the Shop is the right fit for you. So go ahead and email Chris at keystotheshop.com. And today's episode is brought to you by the wonderful folks over at Ground Control. If you go to groundcontrol.coffee, you're going to see this machine has created quite a legacy for itself. The Ground Control brewer in the last many years has been really just revolutionizing the way that we perceive batch brew coffee and extraction technology. And it has opened up people's understanding of what kind of flavor possibilities are there in the coffee that they thought they knew. But once it's put through the paces in the Ground Control, it opens up way more potential. So the new iteration of the Ground Control brewer is a smaller unit. It actually boasts 30% higher output of batch espresso and cold brew. So you're making batch iced lattes, batch cold brew, opening up some verticals for profitability in your shop. And this also, again, makes that wonderful batch brew. So it's a workhorse, allowing you to enter into some innovation with your menu. Again, go visit at groundcontrol.coffee, learn more, and see if this is the kind of thing that you need in your shop to take you to the next level. Groundcontrol.coffee. Now, we're also sponsored today by the Barista Series. This is through Pacific Foods. The Barista Series from Pacific is the plant-based performance beverage of the specialty coffee industry, because they've been around since the beginning, and they've been refining and perfecting their recipes and how they serve the industry through their plant-based performance beverages, tested by great baristas, created for them, really, and the standards that they have for their products, the pride of what they make. It stands up to the heat from steaming. It produces awesome texture for latte art, and it also creates balance in the beverage, where it's not just the taste of the beverage or the almond or soy or oat or whatever. It's harmonizing with the coffee, makes the coffee the star. So go to pacificfoodservice.com, check them out for yourself, get samples. And I think once you taste it, once you use it on your bar, you're going to see what I'm talking about. So if you're looking for the best plant-based beverage for your coffee bar and for your customers, then check out the Barista Series from Pacific. Okay, everyone. Well, today, again, welcome to a Founder Friday episode for June. I'm excited that we get to go all the way out to India in Mumbai to talk with the founder of a really amazing brand of roastery, bakery, design house. There are many things that this company is doing. We're talking with Rahul Reddy, who is the co founder of Subko Specialty Coffee Roasters in Mumbai. And Rahul is not only the co-founder, but he's also a specialty Arabica Q grader. And with Subco, Rahul intends to reimagine the Indian subcontinent as a legitimate contributor to the specialty coffee movement worldwide. You're going to find that in this conversation is a prevalent theme. We dive really deep into that. Now, the conception of Subco began in 2018, cemented itself in 2019, when Rahul retired from or decided to leave behind his careers in technology, social enterprise, risk analysis, and to train as an apprentice at a specialty coffee company called City of Saints in Brooklyn, New York. And there he learned the art of profile roasting coffee as a roasting apprentice, and he learned specialty coffee brewing, packaging, production of cold brew, farm level green buying. So he apprenticed himself to the world of coffee, and in the pursuit of creating this movement this through this business of Subco. And then in the last 4 years now, they've got 8 retail expressions, a large roasting program. They are sourcing 100% from India and really making good on their promise to reimagine and rewrite the narrative of Indian coffee in the coffee industry and in the market. So in this conversation, we're going to talk about the origin story of Rahul and a little bit more detail of what we just mentioned is his transition from another career into coffee, and then how Subco took the first steps from the first building, the challenges that they underwent through COVID because it was that time, it was 2020, when it really was founded and they had to pivot as everyone did. But from there, their investment into that very clear mission has been paying off hugely because it's really resonated with where people were wanting to support this reimagining of how the Indian subcontinent plays a part in the specialty coffee world. And so, as we discuss this, we're going to talk about little practical things that happened along the way to make this work, and then what does scaling look like beyond this for Subco. We talk about what is going to happen with investment and much, much more. So, this is a super inspiring story of somebody who had a vision, had a desire to do something global, started local, and is making good on that. And I think this is something that everyone can be instructed by. So, let's apprentice ourselves to Rahul's story and let's get right to it. Right? Enough from me. Here now is my conversation with the co founder of Subco Specialty Coffee Roasters, Rahul Reddy. Rahul, thank you so much for being on the show. I really am excited to get to know the story of Subco and your story. Welcome. How are you?
Hey, Chris. So good to be here. It's an honor. Thank you so much for having me. I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. Got the final espresso of the morning in, so we're rocking. We're ready to go. Um, Let me just start by asking the requisite question. Your love for coffee and your love for business, obviously, these are two things that are drivers in what you're doing now. But where did the coffee part of this come in? How did you begin to be fascinated with this, just on a personal taste level? It's usually just a personal journey that leads us to our business journey.
Yeah. Um, Good question, Chris. So I think, to be honest, for me, I think probably like a lot of people, it began as something habitual, but quickly it sort of transitioned from habituation to sort of fascination around origin storytelling. So for me, it was sort of okay, the habitual portion of it was, well, this stuff is helpful for me to, kind of keep me going through the day and whatever the the obvious effects that caffeine may have on some of us. I think the real interesting part of it was when I started to realize that, I don't know, I maybe it was presumptuous, but now I feel like maybe not that much. When I started to realize that all of these, tasting notes that I would see on coffee boxes and coffee bags actually had some semblance of reality to me when I would drink it, when I would brew a coffee at home, and even when I would go to a coffee shop and I would see these, cuppers notes on the back of a grinder, and I'd start to think, wait a second, I kind of taste a bit of the hibiscus in this coffee. And I was like, okay, cool. Like this guy or girl knew what they were doing, and that started fascinating me about the diversity of sensory analyses possible within the scope of coffee. And the origin storytelling came next, and I guess I can delve more into that. But essentially, the the thing that really guided my interest towards coffee as a business proposition was why there was really no presence for the Indian farmer that was trying to kind of, do what the Colombian farmer or the Brazilian farmer may have been doing successfully for many decades, centuries. Where was sort of the South Asian, farmer, the Indian farmer, the Nepali farmer, the Myanmar farmer? Where were they in this discourse? And the idea was really just when I was, doing my stints between London and New York, and having grown up in California to a family of Indian origin, I was always quite fascinated that coffee shops, and particularly specialty coffee, as it were, and as it developed, maybe in the last, let's say, 20 odd years, um, was actually they were actually like locations where advanced economies and advancing or lesser developed economies were actually intersecting. And this is a really weird phenomenon, right? So when you start to think about importing products is nothing new, but what's interesting about coffee is, you know, it's one of the few direct to consumer commodities that I can think of, cacao being another, which funnily enough we're working on now, but where the agricultural portion is entirely in the global south, and the vast majority of the consumption is in the global north. And so I think that that's quite an interesting phenomenon as it pertains to coffee, and just given the sheer volume of coffee consumption around the world, I thought to myself, where are my roots in this? Where is sort of my background and its presence, if at all, in the coffee story? And that's how the research phase began.
So you began a research phase to begin Subco and some kind of an expression of or a building of a vehicle to solve that problem that you saw. And previous to doing that, your aptitude for business or your approach to these types of things was what was that informed by? What were you doing professionally or academically before this that has been helpful for you in setting the groundwork for Subco?
Yeah, it's a great question, Chris. So I guess my professional life had sort of two, uh, loosely speaking, two portions to it before Subco entered the mix. The first one was, my academic background is really in the humanities, so I I'm actually really the kind of a poli sci and international relations geek. That's that's sort of where uh, my interests kind of largely stem from, in all things, developing world, agriculture, etc. And so I also did do a minor in global marketing and a minor in French. So I think, travel became a big part of my life very early on. Um, Professionally, I started off actually in the tech space on the marketing side. So a bit of the portion of the business school that informed my bachelor's degree was sort of what I was trying to, I guess, harness in the first few years of my professional life. So I ended up working for a couple of startups in the tech space, and then I spent some time at Google in New York. I then moved on to the impact space where I was again trying to root myself a little bit more in the humanities. So I moved to an organization called change.org for a while, and they were doing sort of um, a lot of digital campaigns around various social campaigns around various issues. And I was helping them on partnerships and business development. And and basically that had me pivot again between sort of London and New York, and that's where many of my formative kind of adult years have been spent. Um, and basically from then on, Chris, I went ahead and did a master's in development economics. So that's where I specialized in South Asian studies, and that's sort of where I think the affinity back towards this place that my grandparents and even my parents were born in, and that's sort of what started to kind of drive me to one, make a contribution in some capacity back to the place where they came from originally, and two, seeing the sort of the economic trends as it were moving towards sort of an Asian present and increasingly an Asian future, and where South Asia, with this young demography, with all of these resources, natural resources and otherwise, um, a large, a young, large English trained workforce, with a lot of Westernization implicit through the colonial process and thereafter. Where does something like coffee play a role, especially in a tea drinking habituation that India typically has? And so
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the journey. It sort of went from tech to impact to um, working as a political risk analyst in Mumbai, India, where I'm currently based. And then all of that culminated in me going back to New York and actually literally begging some contacts I had made during my time at Google to allow me to like apprentice in any roastery that I could. And I was like, you know what? I just want to learn how to roast coffee, grade green coffee, and understand whether my self perception of having a decent palate for coffee was real or not. So that's sort of how the trajectory happened.
That's excellent. And that obviously is something that you're still deeply involved with today as you've got a mission and a need to organize people around that mission, all of which you've just described. It sounds like fertile training ground for that kind of a goal. And I'm curious about the means to the end and how you've chosen specialty coffee versus other expressions of coffee in industrial forms of coffee, where we know, for example, that a lot of Southeast Asian countries produce a lot of coffee that is commercially graded or grown and sold, and that yet in the midst of that there is this, in your perception in early on, and accurately so, this where is the Indian coffee farmer, where is the presence of these countries in a bit more of a spotlight? It seems like you saw specialty coffee as an opportunity for more than just a brand, but as a entry into a higher reality in the marketplace. Tell us a little bit more about how you realized that that particular niche of coffee was the biggest promise, and that's where you would spend your time.
Yeah, it's a great way to put it, Chris. I mean, I guess for me that I don't know if aha moment is still the right phrase anymore, if that's very dated, but yeah, I guess I'll go with it. I'm 34 now, so it is what it is. Um, so honestly, Chris, I think this aha moment of sorts happened when I was doing the research on the green coffee production side, whatever it may be, commercial or specialty. And I realized that I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I want to say 30 plus producing countries that currently exist in the world, or around that number, um, that are producing coffee on an agricultural basis. And it turned out that India was anywhere between the fifth and the seventh largest producer in the world. And I was like, okay, what's going on here? Like most people, I certainly didn't know that. I was pretty certain that pretty much nobody else knows that either, except maybe if you're a green bean buyer and you get a bunch of samples sent to you that are just not very nice most of the time, that are from this part of the world and you pass on them, if you're, again, if you're a specialty guy, right? Not speaking from the point of view of commercial, because that coffee gets exported somewhere, so it is going out into the world, right? It's just that people don't know that for two key reasons. I think obviously the specialty movement and the post harvest processing innovation had not arrived in India in a big way until maybe 5 years ago. And I think the knowledge transfer of post harvest processing innovation and the incentivization for producers in India to start to adopt a lot more controlled fermentations, advanced techniques of like impacting flavor in coffee was not a common thing. And I think the reason it wasn't a common thing was the brand India Coffee as a notional brand, from the agricultural point of view, needed a complete refresh. And to me, it was only going to get a complete overhaul if someone came in and really tried to tap into the super specialty realm. And that meant we had to figure out sort of 85 plus point coffees that were all produced within this part of the world, that we would constrain ourselves from buying green coffee from Brazil or Ethiopia or Colombia or Panama or any of these places that are producing amazing coffee, and instead focus entirely on not only empowering the local farmers that are working here, but also working in tandem with them to say, look, we will position, brand, package, provide experiences at the front end on the direct to consumer level, which will essentially serve to rebrand the origin story itself. And I think that is sort of the motivation that created Subco, and that continues to be why we're doing it. And that's why other product lines have kind of come into the mix along with that, which include working with, for example, local wheat farmers here in India to create world-class sourdough bread, but with a wheat origin that nobody really knows about, or working with cacao from different states in the south of India, but creating confectionery and dark chocolate that you would have probably never thought could come from this part of the world at this standard. So I think the ethos of Subco, and the aha moment was really, okay, we have the resources, we have a reasonable volume of it. Specialty gives us the opportunity to really focus on the premium segmentation solely, and looking at that from a redefinition exercise of the brand, fueled by better practices on the farm level to get flavor profiles to pop, to have, uniqueness, to have some exotic, more fruit forward, more acid forward flavors come through coffee. I saw that as an opportunity to help us redefine and rewrite the rule book about what Indian coffee could be. And that's sort of where this comes from.
Why is that important in the global understanding of Indian coffee, that you sort of people have said, find out what coffee can do. So what are the nuances of Indian coffee in different regions and farms? Once we realize those things, similar to the way that you discovered it as a consumer, you said these notes are here, and that's fascinating. Is that the kind of that domino effect, that catalyst that you want the whole industry to have about Indian coffee, and how does that work logistically in this example?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I mean, I think you brought up. I think I forgot the phrase you used, but it wasn't really about creating a brand. It was actually about rebranding the sector, right? And for me, that meant, of course, we had to create a really powerful brand driven by design. For me, design became a key component to all of this. So
Mm.
we went all in on the idea that in order to achieve this very lofty and very unlikely goal of redefining this entire sector, I knew that the likelihood was low, and I knew that making that kind of impact is tough to kind of do. So what I thought is, one, will work on the farm level directly with a few select farms to create those 85, 86, 87, even up to 90 point kind of score cups. But that was, the average consumer is not sitting there obsessing about point scores on coffee and stuff like that. So which I was well aware of. So the next question became, okay, for those who may be sort of connoisseurs or avid specialty fans of coffee, that maybe fulfills their desires, and seeing these exotic flavors maybe pop up in an Indian origin coffee. But I think the real challenge was, could we use design thinking and graphic design in particular to almost showcase Indian coffee in a way that it hadn't been showcased before? And that led to us building our own creative studio in house. So we actually have what we call like the fourth vertical of Subco, which is a lot of people don't know that all of our packaging, all of our the experiences we build in our stores, all of the content we create, it's all done, sort of by us in house. We don't have any agencies involved. So I think that was a really big step for us to kind of showcase to people that, for example, to highlight Farm X, we actually created a packaging intervention where we took the farmer's entire family album, and we scanned it, and we created these removable photographs that could go into the box. So every lot has a different photo from his family. And every time you buy that coffee, you're actually learning a bit about the legacy of the people that created it, right? So I think it's ideas like that. Indian typography became had a big role to play. So in the Indian and South Asian context, there's so many different languages which some people may be aware of, and the linguistic diversity also means that there is typographic diversity. And what I started thinking was, what if we could showcase not only great coffee from, let's say, 5 origins within India, like 5 different single origin coffees, but also attach a linguistic identity through the script itself and have that really pop on the packaging and design around that script, and have that script tell a story as much as the coffee does. So I think those are the sort of ideas that we sort of try to adopt. And I lost a bit of track on your question, but that's sort of how this sort of fomented.
Well, you mentioned the four verticals of Subco, and I think we're um, down the road a little bit in terms of, now Subco is a thing and we've got four verticals. But I want to take a little bit of time to go backwards. And you were begging people at Google to let you roast coffee and learn Q grading and things like that. Um, but the first step in founding the company itself didn't, I imagine, have four verticals right away. Um, so, getting down to a real practical level, let's say year one, what were the priorities for you to get established so that eventually you would have a foundation for these verticals and more in the future?
Yeah, so good question, Chris. I mean, it started off, as you rightly said, um, with this crash course, I guess, in trying to understand how to roast coffee at this roastery in Brooklyn, New York. And they let
Mm-hmm.
me in, and I kind of said, look, I'll wash your cold brew vats, I'll clean your dishes and the cups, and just I'll be there for several months, and I'll invest whatever savings I had and my time into this. And I did that, and these folks were gracious enough to have me, and I did learn a fair bit about the art of roasting and the science of it, and about green bean buying. And I think that was very critical. Is understanding the sourcing side was really important for me at the time, because being it's important for any coffee business that is trying to do specialty, but I think for me in particular, because I wasn't simply able to choose between this beautiful varietal from Colombia and this amazing Panama geisha, and do I have the money to pay for all these great coffees, and that's about it. Like, not to say there's not more to it than that, but in the context of scoring and judging Indian coffees that were ranging between 70 points to 83 to 84, trying to get those point scores up and the flavors to get more complex, I think learning green grading was important. Learning how to taste these coffees was really important, and evaluate them. I think that led me to the first critical piece that happened, which it's a funny story. So when I was in New York, I was reading about coffee industry and how to kind of get into coffee entrepreneurship in the specialty world, and I read about this thing called the Q grader, and I was like, oh, that's a funny name, and maybe I should just do it, right? And I was like, literally, that was what I thought at the time. I was like, I'm just going to sign up for this thing because people say that it's a good thing to do, and you learn a lot, and if you
Yeah.
get the certification, it's a good thing. And this is the true story, Chris. I signed up for the Q. I I obviously read a couple things about it, but I didn't go in depth, to be honest. I was like, okay, I have a certain amount of savings. This is a really expensive exam. Let me just do
Yeah.
this and get through this, and then. And I was like quite naive about it at the time. And after I signed up and paid for the course, I started doing more research as to, hey, what do I need to know about the Q? And everything I read was like, you better be at least 5 to 7 years in your coffee, profession, and you need to be like quite experienced before you attempt this. And there's 21 exams, and there's this thing called triangulation, and no one really passes it, but it's really hard. And anyway, so so my mind kind of exploded at that point, and I was like, shit, I got to get my money back and do this later because I'm not ready for this. And I spoke to the folks that were hosting it in Jersey, and they were like, "Sorry, man, like you can come back another time, but like we can't, we don't do refunds. I'm really sorry, and this and that." And I was like, "Shit, well, I came all the way from India. I have to go back. I've identified a property. I was supposed to build a small like little micro roastery in there, and get started at that time." And I was like, you know what? I think that I understand coffee pretty well. I tend to have this gravitational pull towards these cuppers notes, and I'm able to differentiate the origins like on my own. So like whatever, I'll just go try. And yeah, and I went ahead and did the queue, and yeah, and somehow except for one triangulation test, I got through all of the other tests, and I survived. And then yeah, so that was cool. But I did fail the one triangulation test, and I had to redo it. But then on the second go, I got through. So the queue was really, I think, for me starting out and taking such a big risk on doing it. I know it's a bit of a controversial test in some respect, but I think it was really useful for me, and I think it was extremely helpful for me to, in some sense, leapfrog in my own confidence to be able to work backwards with the farmers in really trying to help create this movement towards 85 plus point coffee and whatever that means, just to high quality coffee, right? And I think that's sort of what happened next, and then finally, I mean, the next few tactical things that happened, I guess, Chris, for the audience, was we identified this space, and in our case, I was in Mumbai or Bombay, India, and I wanted to kind of create this institution of sorts. So the idea was we would find a space that, I kept telling you about this whole idea of redefinition, right, of the origin. So part of that redefinition was even the choice of the space, because we wanted the space to be something that would be out of sight, that you'd have to discover, that would be highly experiential, that would be sort of a journey toward, and if you find it, you experience something you may not have experienced before, um, in the context of Indian coffee or Indian cafes. And so I think that's what informed the decision to work around this many constraints in a residential neighborhood. Um, we kind of we found this 100-year-old, former sort of like Portuguese designed kind of colonial house, and we wanted to convert the bottom floor of that into a small roastery and a cafe and a small bakery in the back. And that's what started the journey. And the context for your viewers, though, is that all of what I described, believe it or not, climaxes when I come back to India. We we successfully built the space out. We designed it in a way that was meant to be exportable. This is a very interesting detail, I think, because when everyone else around the world was saying, you know what, let's get this like Scandinavian design in our space wherever we're located, let's strip it down, let's get super minimalist, let's not be warm, let's sort of, do light roasted coffee, light wood, light everything. I was like, all right, you know what? Let's let's create our vision for if we are shit lucky and we do an amazing job somehow, and one day people start to say, you know what, I would love to see Subco in this other country. What would it look like? What would it feel like? How would it be experienced? It would have to have a strong identity of its own, rooted in the terroir, rooted in the materials available here, and still global in its outlook. And I think that's sort of what informed the first space. And for your viewers' knowledge, all of that happened, and we ended up trying to open on March 16th, 2020, and 3 days later, the world shut down and India shut down for COVID. So that's what happened.
Wow. Okay. So, a couple of things here. I mean, that's awesome and well done with the queue and just, that what a great story. I think you're also like this idea of redefinition and reframing the narrative, especially founding your business in a colonial structure, is really on the nose. And the perception of Indian coffee is in some sense that you're trying to undo. I'm curious how you perceived this comment. Actually, I just wanted to focus on for a second. You're trying to help the coffee get up in score through roasting, and that insinuates that there's maybe some kind of a uh, understanding of Indian coffee from a roaster's perspective, that once it has these characteristic like earthiness or whatever it is the terroir of the time was the goal of that coffee, that there was some potential on the table that was being left on the table because people were simply looking for one particular note of that. And so you're saying that, and I'm curious how you would respond to this, that the coffees that we have known up to this point had not even reached their full potential, but in the hands of an industry that typecasted the coffee for a particular flavor note, just let it be that flavor note, and it could have been much more earlier.
100%. I mean, I think that's true. I think that everything from the context with which people tend to green bean buyers buy Indian coffee, meaning, hey, I need a filler
Mm.
coffee, I need something for my blender that kind of evens it out, gives it some earthy notes, maybe gives it a bit of spice, gives it a bit of that, maybe the reason sometimes people buy some, some Brazils or even some Indonesian coffees, oftentimes, have a similar kind of descriptor. Um, I think the funny part is the percentage of coffee that you find on average in countries like Italy or Germany in their blends, it finds itself being often Indian coffee. And
Mm-hmm.
from just a volume point of view, that the question became exactly what you asked, which is, could this become a single origin offering that could stand on its own and still be interesting enough to highlight both the terroir and the farmer's post-harvest process? And I think what really happened is two things. One, there's actually, I wouldn't say we have ultra high elevation coffee in India, but we have higher elevation coffee than people think. So that could be going up as high as between 16 and 1700 meters above sea level. So
Right.
not low elevation coffee. Um, that's one just natural factor to note. The second is super interesting, which a lot of people that maybe have typically understood coffee as sort of like Brazil primarily or Colombia, is that I don't know the exact percentage. It's hard to say, but I would tell you that the vast majority of Indian coffee is almost entirely grown under the shade of trees. So when you look at an average coffee farm, and if you've never been to one, even if you look at the images of an average coffee farm in Brazil, you'll basically see like a deforested piece of land with coffee growing on it, right? And in India, the coffee is growing under silver oaks. It's growing in intercrop fashion with lots of pepper. It's growing with fruits sometimes, and jackfruit and mangoes and other stuff around it, avocados. So I think the permaculture of Indian coffee is another interesting aspect of it that a lot of people don't know about. And in terms of what people's perception and how they used to buy and how they maybe could buy in the future, I from an Indian origin point of view, I would say that the farm level we discussed in terms of the elevation and the terroir and the intercropping, but um, also the post harvest processing, with regards to things like anaerobic fermentation, which had never really happened in India before, and farmers have started to try to understand things like really carefully, meticulously sorting their cherries, like this, and before they try to anaerobically ferment anything. And I think these are the kind of details that I think for a long time were not viewed as very valuable for the farmers out here. And I think that they were exporting coffees at the rate that they would get, and the buyers were expecting the same result every year from them. And there was never really this like disruptive force that came in and said, wait a second, why don't we try to increase the value of our coffees through deploying post-harvest processing techniques that could do that? And I believe not only with Subco, with the community of us in the roasting community out here, multiple brands had to come around and showcase that there could be a domestic demand that could then probably empower the farmers to not only service domestic demand, but also then change the perception of their um, export buyers around what the coffee could be, because they started seeing that domestic brands were getting these high quality single origin lots that they could roast effectively and showcase, which could compete with some of the coffees they bought from other origins. So I think it's this pretty big loop that has kind of been created that I think Subco is trying to kind of be at the forefront of.
You showcase, I like that word. You created this space and you have this roasting operation in Mumbai, and 2020 hits. Obviously, you've made it through, but talk to us a little bit now about as you're pursuing this loop, this ecosystem in the city to showcase to others to reframe that narrative, how you went about gathering people and also what went into that expression. Was it also a cafe right away? Was it just roasting and then quickly a cafe? How did it look to get through 2020 in a way that you didn't have to sacrifice too much in order of the momentum that you already had? And then what did those expressions look like locally, and how did that lead to success beyond the city limits?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of happened in sort of rapid fashion for us, Chris. I mean, 2020, rolled around, like I said, 3 days before India went into lockdown was when we started, and it was just a complete, you know, I don't know how if I can use expletives on the show, but anyway, yeah, it wasn't great, and basically we had some decisions to make. I mean, at the time we were, I don't know, I really don't know how this all happened, but that year we started to get recognized by folks like Sprudge, who had made us their runner-up for best new cafe at the time. That they had, I don't even know how they heard about us or found out about it. I think that was end of 2020, maybe. Bon Appetit magazine in the States had also done a piece of coverage on our launch, and someone wanted to write about this. And I was like, wow, I mean, I don't know why this is happening, but thank you. And so some light was drawn to the business and to the idea through that time period. But to answer your question, the in order to do that reframing and that reimagination, my thesis was, of course, I knew that from a financial point of view, the most capital intensive way I could do this was to try to build a cafe first and to try to manage a cafe and run it. And I had no experience in hospitality whatsoever. And so for me, that was in itself a big journey. And I had, along the way, I had met the guy who would become my partner, Daniel, who is actually an Illinois native. And he had moved to India like 15 years ago. And he had become this sort of really, I don't know how to describe it. I know I'm biased, but um, ask around, and I think you'll hear the same response, which is I think he's a bit of a savant when it comes to baking, and he
Mm.
specialized in building insane sourdough bread and insane viennoiserie, croissants and laminated doughs. And my thought process at the time, and this kind of feeds into your question, was in order to reframe and reimagine coffee in this context, no matter how well we sourced, how much better the farmer did, no matter how good our design thinking may have been, I thought that this was still a niche exercise that needed something that was not so niche to make it spill over into cultural relevance. And that to me was bread, and something that could be um, loved and be beloved by basically everybody. And I mean, who is going to tell you that they honestly don't love an insane croissant that is flaky and fresh and looks incredible with all the layers and etc. Whether or not you should be eating it often is a separate question, but that wasn't the point. So that's where the baking came into the picture, and essentially the concept became, could we correspondingly utilize the craft that Daniel had built this incredible expertise in. And I mean this when I say it. I believe Daniel is one of the world's greatest bakers who, if he were to be in another country, would be a household name by now. And that's what I feel. And I think what we tried to do is we tried to say, look, you've made this incredible base product. Can we, in addition to try to redefine Indian coffee, can we leverage the flavors that are naturally around us in India and incorporate them into baked goods? and that became the sort of thesis in which allowed us to do things like create the Kashmiri walnut sea salt chocolate chip cookie, where we sourced walnuts from the state of Kashmir in India, in South Asia, and basically put that into a cookie. Or we leveraged this thing called gunpowder, which is this Indian spice, which is also called podi, and we folded it into sourdough bread, and we made this like Indian spice sourdough bread, basically, right? So then all of this started to kind of coexist as a concept along with the coffee that was also supposed to be elevated in nature. And that's why the cafe became the first concept that we wanted to push forward with to aid in this redefinition. COVID stopped that in its tracks right away. So what we did to combat that was the first 6 months. I mean, in fact, a lot of people don't know this, but after Wuhan, supposedly Mumbai had the most strict COVID norms in the world outside of Wuhan. So it was really
Wow.
quite crazy being in this city during that time. I mean, I had to like get on a bicycle and sneak past police officers every day to go into the space and to like roast beans and then get back home. And I had to get some essential service pass to do all of this. And it was kind of a crazy time, a very crazy time. And we pivoted as you have to, Chris. I mean, at that time, and we started to kind of say, look, we're gonna roast coffee, and I was the roaster for Subko for the first 12 months of the operation. So I also roasted the beans at that point. Um, and yeah, we started roasting coffee, and we developed what I felt was a pretty inspiring and unique way of packaging with like screen printed old school labels that looked like Indian train tickets. And we tried to kind of create this whole ethos around all of that. And yeah, that's how we started, was just roasting some beans and trying to like deliver them around the neighborhood of Bandra. And that slowly then became, okay, now we can at least do some cookies with the Kashmiri walnuts. And then that became, okay, now we can have some people come for takeaway and pickups 3 months in or 4 months in. And then finally, when the first lockdown kind of ended, people were able to come back in the cafe. And that's when many of these ideas became reality. So we started very much in the cafe space, and we didn't go down the realm
Hmm.
of trying to build a great e-commerce business from the get-go. I think we were focused on the experiential side of it, and we wanted to get people to really sensorially understand what this redefinition meant before we started to think about how to scale it out as fast as we could.
Do you feel like that was an asset to you in that if you had built out e-commerce that you wouldn't have been informed as much by the response you had locally to help you refine the way you approach it, or even just personally you growing as an owner to have the capacity to like hire the right people or represent the brand well based on the feedback that you got locally at that time?
100%. I mean, I can't imagine looking back how we would have. I mean, I know there's ways to solicit feedback and reviews and everything else, but I I I feel like this probably applies everywhere, but I feel like in a country where coffee as a community and as a movement was in itself trying to carve out a space, there was no real way. And I believe increasingly, as the competition has exploded globally around specialty coffee, I think it's increasingly important for those who have the means and the privilege to be able to kind of put together a cafe experience for people. I think it's an ideal way to kind of try to launch product. And I think it's, even if that means just doing one space and creating that initial um, experience center or tasting room or whatever you may want to call it. I think it is, I do believe it's critical really to have that in place. And I don't think we would have ever been able to iteratively, like as you said, evolve, pivot, get the right feedback, change products that weren't working, understand where we went wrong in roasting a batch or whatever it may have been, right? So yeah, 100%. I would stand by the decision to do it this way.
Nice. Right. So how many cafes do you have now? I think it's 8.
Yeah, like we have various formats. So we have sort of, yeah, we have sort of like four kind of larger format like flagship spaces, and then we have sort of what we call like the Subco mini model, which is sort of like a shop in shop kind of model that we where we share space with another brand that we think is really cool doing something interesting. So
Yeah.
yeah, all in all, we have around that many. Yeah.
Okay. So this requires a lot of people. and getting the right people and helping them help others in this goal of redefinition, the renaissance of Indian coffee through what Subco is doing. It's a difficult thing, and this is not just you doing this. You have at this point a team of people who are helping to source not only the coffee but also people to join the team and represent well what's going on there. Talk a little bit about the values of what it takes to be a representative of the brand in a person to person context in one of these cafes for Subco.
Yeah, another great question. I mean, I think the core pillars of it, Chris, are rooted in probably. I mean, I could probably chalk it up to kind of a handful of traits. I think, the first one would be folks with a lot of who are keen to be on the journey towards uh, injecting a new layer of respect towards craft food and beverage. I think that's something fairly. I mean, it's newer to India than it is to other places. I'd say that folks that see Subco as a an aspirational sort of milieu to express themselves as creators in one way or the other. I think so. I think creativity and having that creative bone in the body is something that we value a lot. I think we are looking for folks across the company who are, at once, yes, we're trying to grow. We need some discipline. We have targets. We have all of these kind of things that have to come into the picture. But I think ultimately, the important bit is, are the folks who join us rooted in the ideology of design thinking, of creativity, of really understanding that this pursuit of redefinition of super high quality premium product doesn't happen really in a cookie cutter manner. It's always kind of evolutionary and iterative. And I think people that think in a very sort of linear manner are probably not the best people, for us. I think we require folks that can actually do a lot of the swerving and a lot of the adaptation. So I think being adaptive is another really, really big component, not only to us, but I think into startup life in general. And I think in our case, being very open to and passionate about being in a heavily interdisciplinary environment is really big, because we have a coexistence, like I said, of these four areas really. I mean, we have our roastery and our coffee division, we have our bakehouse division, we have now our chocolate division, and then we have our design and content division. So
Mm.
I think the sheer kind of, I guess, like audacity of trying to do all of those things under one brand um, is I think what does set us apart. But I do also think that that's um, a value system of coexistence uh, within that heavily interdisciplinary environment. I think is something that we look for.
Yeah, I imagine those are things especially important for people who are leading those cafes and are managing those verticals of the business as well. And I'm curious how much that applies to people who are working an opening shift in a cafe.
Yeah, I mean, no, 100%. I think it applies everywhere from those who are leading the product creation and production to the folks managing the packaging to the folks on the floor, because at the end of the day, the ethos and culture that is Subco, the subculture rather that is Subco that we're trying to create, it permeates from the person who is on the floor serving you that flat white, all the way back to the person who's working in the roastery picking up the gunnies, all the way into the kitchen who's laminating the dough. And I think always room for improvement across the board for us. But I think overarchingly, I think we've managed to kind of foment that value system at every level. I don't think it's reserved to just the folks that are in management, right? I think it's all the way down to the folks, even our housekeeping team, has a certain understanding of the meticulousness of the brand. So I think that is important.
So at this point, with your cafes, with the roasting, with the branding, and the verticals, you're 4 years in, and a lot has happened. Where are you in fulfilling your goals? Where is the have you seen a a tide change based on what you've been working on?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think about that sometimes. I think, you know, we are, I think our goals are evolving, first of all. I don't think the goals are entirely the same as they were in the beginning, but I do think the ethos of it remains, which is we want to still be on the journey of redefinition. I think that is something that I'm very bullish on. I think we're increasingly viewed that way in the industry, both locally and thanks to folks like you, hosting me today. I guess we've made a little bit of noise, hopefully outside of the country as well, in terms of what we're trying to do, and that's incredibly rewarding for me because I mean, I spent most of my life, of course, outside of India, so for me to know that folks are looking at us as um, some, as an organization that uh, possibly is respectable in what we're trying to do from an Indian context, I think for me that's a big it's a big responsibility. So I feel that the way the goals are evolving are also towards us looking at different geographies in a very serious way now in terms of how we establish the cafe experiences and getting our products out more widely. So I think um, that being said, we haven't taken the approach of, let's get distributors as quickly as we can and distribute these products everywhere we can and go at it as a volume game. So I think the way we've thought about it was, okay, let's look at remaining in the segment that we want to remain in, which is in this premium experiential redefinition, redesigning goalpost. And how do we do that first within other sort of um, cities within India that I think could use a Subco experience or two or three of this nature. So cities like Bangalore or New Delhi come to mind as
Mm.
major cities in India where we haven't really established ourselves as a brand yet. And then in parallel, Chris, I think the international story is very, very critical to what we're trying to do because for me, the goal has always been that if Subco made the impact it was envisioned to make, that we could tell this story globally. And what that meant to me was how do we identify the spaces or the cities rather that one maybe have had some level of intersection with South Asian culture already, and others where the South Asian culture wasn't really a critical part of the cultural fabric that we could kind of help tell the story. I think in both instances, Subco has a certain kind of relevance, and so we are thinking quite proactively now after recently closing a fundraise and some other bits that have happened.
Right.
We've thought a lot more about how cities like Dubai, which is now like sort of exploding in coffee culture, cities like London, which has long been the case, possibly even cities like
Yeah.
New York in the future, how we can build a presence and an experience around the Subco universe in these places. So I think those are sort of the evolving nature of the goals, and I think we're trying to kind of do a lot of things to you know to get there.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the funding, and it makes sense, and that was my assumption that the scalability of what you do is integral to the actual impact you want to make. With I mean, redefining centuries of assumptions and trade takes a little bit of time and takes a lot of funding to do so. And at the same time, I think you're the integrity of the business that you've been uh, curating right now is what also makes it scalable because a it is something people are resonating with. It is all the things you do in house, um, and reading the room being the global industry, I suppose, such a right way to say this is the time for Indian coffee to redefine itself. Um, I think one of my last question here is the long-term impact of this. How is this something how do you want to see this impact be just not Subco, but other coffee roasters and growers in India well into the future? Because your success is not just going to be your success. It feels like, yeah, it's going to be everyone's success in India rather than just Subco.
100%, Chris, and that's what I meant about if anybody out there is looking at us as a respectable component of this that can represent the Indian coffee movement effectively, that's not only an honor but also a burden in some way, and in a positive way. It's a responsibility rather, and I think what that means to me is everything across the value chain, whether it be the green bean side. We're doing some green bean processing projects on our own now to try to kind of, offer something out to people that they might want as a roasting community in other countries. So we're working a little bit on that on a small scale. We're obviously working on the roasted side and the retail side. And so I think as you correctly said, if Subco can continue on this mission in a way that is productive and resonates with folks in the way that we needed to and wanted to, I think it will be a huge net positive for the entire coffee community and the cacao community out here in India. And I think it will open up a lot of avenues for brands that are anywhere in the value chain that I described to access more and more of the sort of mind share, at least on the global level. And then, as I see it, the mind share comes first, and then the market share comes after that.
Well said. I love that. Rahul, it's been great to talk to you. I'm glad to get you on the show. I'm sure we could talk much, much more in depth, but I'm looking forward to seeing the continued success and expansion of Subco and the mission being fulfilled to greater degrees every year. Where can we learn more about what you're doing?
Well, thank you so much, Chris. Yeah, absolute honor to be here today. Yeah, I guess the best spot would be on Instagram at the moment. So we're at the rate Subco Coffee and at the rate Subco Cacao, SUBKO Coffee, SUBKO Cacao. So that's where we're at. Um, I can provide my personal information as well, if somewhere maybe on the link to Keys to the Shop, if you want to reach out to me. And yeah, absolute honor to be part of this community, Chris. Thank you for including me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rahul.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay, everyone. Well, I hope that you enjoyed that. Huge thank you to Rahul Reddy for being on the show. I really enjoyed the idea that Rahul is continually focused on infusing all that they do with that idea of how is this a modern, authentic expression of Indian culture, and how can we influence others beyond India, beyond the local market, to change the way they perceive what we are and how we can contribute to the greater world of coffee and beyond. So that they do all these things in house is really awesome. A lot to manage there, but they are guided by their values. They are guided by this mission. And as they have worked with integrity from 2020 until now, with this new investment that they are now receiving, it looks like Subco is going to take this and spread it globally, as Rahul was mentioning. So, a lot of things to be paying attention to as Subco continues to rewrite the narrative of Indian coffee. Now, if you're interested in learning more about Subco and staying tuned as they continue to grow, you can go to Subco Coffee on Instagram. That's at Subco Coffee. Follow them there. You can also go to their website, subco.coffee, and I would encourage you to do both of those things as soon as you can. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback for me about today's episode, go ahead and email chris@keystotheshop.com. I would encourage you to listen to the episodes that we put in the show notes, which are related to today's episode, and that'll help you continue to learn about what's happening in terms of the rise of people doing wonderful things in producing countries to rewrite narratives that will help empower that local community. I think that's a huge thing that's happening today. It's been happening for a little bit, but the tide change, it continues to change. And Subco is part of that tide change. for Indian coffee. So again, huge thank you to Rahul, and stay tuned to what they're doing. So that's it for today's episode. Thanks so much. Don't forget, if you are interested in coaching or consultation with Keys to the Shop Consulting, you just need to email me, Chris at keystotheshop.com. That's CHRIS at keystotheshop.com. Feel free to reach out, DM on Instagram at Keys to the Shop. And stay tuned for future episodes. Go to the website, look for past episodes that you can learn from. I really appreciate all of you taking the time to listen and share these episodes. Thanks a lot. And as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.